just in case you missed it. It's the top 5 sports talkers of the day. Now, it's time for Dan Barrero's Top 5 at 5. Brought to you by Gutter Helmet of Minnesota. Never clean your gutters again. Learn more at gutterhelmetmn.com.
It is Top 5 at 5 time. Gaardsy, where would you like to begin?
I'd like to begin in Indianapolis because, as we know, Dan, everything is better in Indianapolis.
That's been proven.
It's just established. We all understand it. But this is nothing official because nothing really official happens on NFL Tuesdays. There's no injury report. Players' day off. Cam Bynum right now is at Hy-Vee and Egan with the voice of the Vikings, Paul Allen. So we'll get an injury report and stuff tomorrow, maybe on Blake Cashman, which I know everybody's wondering about. He looks good at Gopher Homecoming, by the way, just standing on the sideline. Turf toe looked good, hanging out with Ron Johnson and Lawrence Maroney and those guys. So hopefully he's back. But our dream of Anthony Richardson jogging out on the field at U.S. Bank Stadium as the starter for the Colts Sunday Night Football, apparently is not going to come to fruition. Your guy Jeremy Fowler and everyone's guy Adam Schefter, reporting today that Colts coaches met this morning and ultimately decided to change quarterbacks, opting for Joe Flacco, the cagey, wily, bearded vet, over the struggling Richardson.
Well, one thing we didn't talk about with Seifert, we got into this developing story, but he reminds us that, or reminded me off air, that the Colts' bevy of receivers is not exactly distinguished, that the kid's not getting any help there. He's wildly inaccurate. He is, as Brian Flores said earlier today, capable of, sort of nullifying all those bad plays with one 68-yard play that you can't believe. But I think you're playing the odds. Look, if you go back to the beginning of the whole Richardson saga, it's a disaster because it is, I think, true. And Seifert and I, again, he talked about this before we began on the air, that they made the decision to basically play him from the beginning, right? He's probably a guy who needed to sit at least a year, maybe 2. But then once you make that decision, then how do you backtrack from it? That we're gonna suffer the slings and arrows. He's gonna learn the hard way, but we're committed to this. And now they're obviously not committed to it because they're under heat and they're under pressure. And he's completing like 42% of his passes, which is unheard of. It's unheard of from like 50 years ago, let alone now. So I think it's fair to say that to this point, it has been a botched approach that doesn't serve Anthony Richardson's best interest, whatever he could end up being at a QB. I think it gives the Colts a better chance to more readily compete with the Vikings. It's another veteran quarterback. It's another veteran quarterback who can get rid of the ball, who still at his advanced age has shown that ability. By the way, he also has the proclivity to give up interceptions. Sure. He can throw picks. He's got a high pick number, not this year, but can. But he is a guy who's going to he's much more accurate. And so I think it becomes, even with a less mobile quarterback, a lot more challenging when another QB who kind of in style is similar to what the last two have done, even if he's not as good as those two. I think that adds to the challenge for the Purple on national TV.
Speaking of national TV, it is a rematch of the Western Conference Finals tonight at Target Center, 6:30 tip. You can listen to that game on the Timberwolves channel of your iHeartRadio app. Jim Peterson rejoins Alan Horton on the radio call because there is no local TV broadcast, so it's TNT tonight. Luka had a calf contusion for much of training camp, but he's not on the injury report tonight. Klay Thompson had back stiffness earlier in training camp. He is not on the injury report tonight. You mentioned they were in Utah last night. They knocked off the Jazz, or they played the Jazz. I don't know where the game was. They ended up winning by 8. Luka played 33 minutes. All the starters, I think, were in double figures, including Kyrie, but their injury sheet is pretty clean with the stars. Dante Exum and Maxi Kleber are both out. No injuries for the Wolves, and both teams, Dan, are 2-1.
Will who's their big man, their kid, the young big man who called out during this offseason in a podcast, Rudy?
What was his name? Hang on.
I can see him, but I can't remember his name. He was very good, off to a very promising start as a defensive force and a rebounder. and a dunker, as I recall.
A really good dunker.
We'll get the name in a minute.
Lively.
Rudy, yeah, exactly. It's Lively. That's who it was. Is it possible Rudy is going to be a little bit more motivated, or will Rudy say, I'm not going to lower myself to getting into those kinds of petty battles. All I'm interested in is winning the ball game.
Rudy's pretty professional.
Tends to be, I think.
But he's also Dan Human.
Yeah, that's it.
He hears things.
It will be one of the... I mean, we spent a lot of time on the Luka part of it, but I actually think this might be the more interesting subplot to follow.
I liked what Chris Finch said the other day, Dan, and I know we've defended Rudy forever. I think it was the Toronto game where Finchy said something along the lines of, we get into these games and it's kind of a messy situation. I'm paraphrasing. And Rudy just doesn't allow us to lose because he just makes a couple of defensive plays. There was a play, I think in the Kings game, where again, he had another one of those possessions where he guarded at one point 4 different Kings.
Yeah. And by the way, it didn't go viral.
Isn't that funny?
It did not go viral because it doesn't expose them. Yeah, and it's like, and none of it is as spectacular, but it all contributes to what on a possession by possession basis makes him so valuable defensively. Doesn't mean he's the perfect defensive player. Doesn't mean he can't get beat sometimes one-on-one defensively. But what you're laying out is the subtle stuff that never goes viral. And you'd like to think the people who analyze this stuff for a living would understand that rather than almost play to the lowest denominator when it comes to, you see one-on-one, he got his ass handed to him again. His legs froze outside and he got killed, right?
It was in the fourth quarter, too, in a close game, a playoff-type game in Sacramento. It's just like, what are you watching? I think we just have to give up and just enjoy it.
Yeah, you just have to surrender.
Because it's not worth. Is it tilting at windmills? Isn't that what we established?
Pretty close, yeah.
Phrase?
That's it.
Marc-Andre Fleury is expected to play his final game tonight. You'll hear it right here on the Fan. Final game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, where, of course, he had so much success. Played with Bill Guerin, his current boss.
I think Guerin's on the trip.
I would imagine he is. They had a bunch of flower bouquets in the number 29. I think that was Russo that tweeted that out a little bit a while ago. But it's a 6 o'clock puck drop. That's why we're out at 6. The final game for your Minnesota Wild on this road trip after they finally lost in regulation over the weekend in Philadelphia.
Well, it's all gravy now, right? I mean, you'd like to finish with a victory, but we have more than survived the road trip that everybody was pointing to early as being a kind of an early test of, okay, is this going to be more of the same, or are we seeing some signs that there might be some improvement and some changes going on?
Especially with some of the injuries that they've already had to deal with. So the puck drop, as I mentioned, is 6, and should be a nice night for Flower. Hopefully he plays well. Hasn't played in a minute, but that's going to kind of be his role with the Gus Bus playing so well. Finally, how did the New York Yankees respond to our guy Derek Jeter throwing out the first pitch? And I didn't watch it.
I did.
Did he throw off the mound?
He threw off the mound, and it was a strike.
Of course it was.
It was a perfect pitch. It reminded me of the President Bush pitch, right, at the knees.
Yes, God.
But I literally froze what I was doing to see, Jeets, you're going to go all the way up to the mound, aren't you?
Yeah, you have to.
And he didn't even hesitate. And I got to tell you something, he looked nervous in the dugout. I'm going, even Jeets maybe is feeling a little bit, but it was a beautiful toss to home plate. Unfortunately, the Yankees they probably could use a little of his offense right now because they can't score.
One of the lines that Jeter used to say all the time when he was a player was, sooner or later, the ghosts come out, talking about Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, all the legends in some form or fashion show up. They've not showed up yet in this World Series. Now, the Dodgers are pretty good, the fan has learned. But Aaron Judge is not playing well. The Yankees are juggling their lineup tonight, and they're
bullpen game for the Dodgers. They're going to use like 8 pitchers. They go all gravy tonight, for the Brooms. That's it.
Do you have ESPN on in there?
I do.
Because I'm looking at this stat that's worth mentioning. Teams down 3-0 in best-of-7 postseason series are 1-39 all time. The only team to ever lose a 3-0 lead would be the New York Yankees.
That's correct. The Boston Red Sox, right? Yeah.
Against the Boston Red Sox.
That's it.
I think there's more documentaries being made about that.
Somebody also had the stat, could this be possible? In the 9th inning or later, no team has ever come back to win with the greatest comeback in the 9th inning by the team down 2 runs is 2 runs.
Is that
or
right?
more? That's it. There's never been a team down, that was down 3 that came back in the 9th. That shocks me after all these World Series. But I thought I read that correctly.
The Fan and 2 men and a junk truck want to give you a shot to put a grand in your hand with our national cash contest. Final keyword of the evening is credit. Go to KFAN.com and enter the keyword credit.
Louis will join us at the bottom of the hour. We'll get to a couple of texts and maybe some, combo platter points before he arrives. As I mentioned, Louis is going to join us at the bottom of the hour. More hockey conversation with him before we turn it over to the Wild, beginning right here on the flagship at 6 o'clock this very evening. A few texts coming in regarding the mail stories out of real other parts of the country, and then the story that got way too, in my view, scant attention regarding the votes that were, what was it? It was in Edina, I think. It was ballots left unattended outside Edina City Hall last week. Here's the perfect text to sort of prove my point that I had just discussed when we got to it. Dan, the reason, this is Joe from Minneapolis, the reason why news outlets didn't cover the neglected ballot box is because the Republicans will have then more fuel to say the whole thing is rigged and will further erode people's faith in our free and fair election, setting up the GOP's excuse machine if Trump loses. I get what you're saying, but that story really proves nothing as far as voter fraud, which is what Trump is constantly lying about. I don't know how much more clear I can be on this, but it's that approach to covering the news that I detest more than any other. And we've talked about it. It's actually a decent news story, but if I cover it, I'm going to give sustenance to the lunatics on the other side of the political aisle. So if you play out the logic is then we're not going to cover it. You know what that does? All that does is arouse greater suspicion because the story exists. And in fact, Channel 5 did cover it. It didn't have to be the lead story in the news. It doesn't rise to that level. It didn't need to be a banner headline in the Star Tribune. It didn't rise to that level, but it was worthy. And I will guarantee you something. If a former Democratic DFL Secretary of State has a presser in which he or she would describe concerns about how these ballots are being handled, it would have been covered more extensively. That's wrong. That's what arouses suspicion in the system. You cannot cover a story because of fear of what lunatics are going to attempt to do with it. On that basis, you can talk yourself out of covering almost anything. What you do is you cover it with perspective. You make it clear there is no sign that there was any chicanery as a result of these ballots being left unattended to the degree they were. The Secretary of State's office did say this is inexcusable. We are going to try to make sure it does not happen again. The courier service, the driver of that vehicle has been dismissed. I don't know if, in fact, that person has been. That's what was declared at the point. So you can put it in, you should cover it with perspective, but the idea that, you know what, they'll grab it. Closed circuit to Joe W. from Minneapolis. The folks who are that irrational, they're going to do it regardless. So write the story, follow the story for the rest of us. That's what I would do, because otherwise then I begin to suspect that you're not playing the thing straight. And I'll again add, given the number of people who are now voting early, now, encouraged to vote early in a way that we've never been encouraged before, that these safeguards become more important. There doesn't have to be proof that fraud took place to still say, well, there should be a custody issue here where you try to be as careful as you can be. But if you dismiss it that was my theory, that it was dismissed because it's going to be used the wrong way. You can talk yourself out of so many stories, and in doing so, to me, all you do is you undermine your own credibility as being a publication or a news site that does what we think is the best thing to do, and that is to follow the story wherever it may go and not pretend that this has to be partisan, even if it ultimately is going to become partisan. All the problems Trump raised were dismissed on standing. How would you know if they were true or not? The lack of interest in this Edina ballot story is the same lack of interest we saw in claims of fraud in 2020. I'll go back to, let me give you this item that I've been saving for a while. This is out of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution via the Secretary of State of Georgia. Is he a flaming left-winger? I don't think so. Is he a hardcore Brad Raffensperger? Raffensperger, I should say? No, I don't think so. He's an enemy of Donald J. Trump because he wouldn't do what Trump asked him to do, correct?
A member of the Republican Party.
An audit uncovered 20 non-citizens out of 8.2 million registered voters in Georgia, according to findings announced by the Secretary of State. That was just a few days ago. Trump had nothing. That was Trump's problem on Jan 6. Let me remind you, I saved this today because somebody brought this to my attention. Jan 6 speech from your guy, Trump. Now it's up to Congress to confront, let me back up. We're going to have somebody in there that should not be there, and our country will be destroyed, and we're not going to stand for that. Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy, and after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down. You will have an illegitimate president. That's what you'll have, and we can't let that happen. We won in a landslide. This was a landslide. They said it's not American to challenge the election. This was the most corrupt election in the history maybe of the world. We must stop the steal, and then we must ensure that such outrageous election fraud never happens again, can never be allowed to happen again. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if we don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. That was Jan 6. That was from January 6. No evidence whatsoever. And by the way, again, you'd think he'd be more strategic and say, hey, we think we eked out a victory. No. In Trump's world, because it's all about penis size, he not only had to win, he had to win in a landslide. Wasn't even close. It was a complete landslide, is what it was, without any evidence being offered, including in the state of Georgia, which has been discussed before. So, again, we can, I think, what's the expression, chew gum and
walk and
chew gum at the same time? I think we should, I'd like to think I can say two things at once. The last election wasn't stolen, but I think it's okay to be vigilant and to ask questions about the sanctity of the ballot and the steps that are being made, and whether even in the law in the state of Minnesota, there should be greater clarification in an era in which there are more people voting before Election Day than ever before regarding who's in charge of those ballots. I think you should be able to do two things at once without necessarily, well, who are you playing to there? Sounds like you think the last election was stolen. Yeah, I've said that a lot on this show. But that's sort of where we are with this thing. That we're just, it's a dangerous road to give media outlets excuses for not covering stuff, for not covering the news. And by the way, if you cover a news conference in which Kiffmeyer and a few other Republicans make their claims, that doesn't mean you're endorsing it. Just means you're acknowledging it, that a former Secretary of State for many, many years is she playing politics? Possibly. DFLers don't ever play politics? Come on, man. What world are we living in? That was a story that, with very rare exception, as I mentioned, got way too short shrift. And then for the lunatic fringe, you're asking them to be more paranoid when you have an inability to at least even cover the story or acknowledge the possibility that there are legitimate concerns about whatever took place in Edina, Minnesota. That's very different than saying that the last election was stolen when we have no discernible evidence from Republicans or Democrats who actually were involved in that election for believing that that is indeed what took place. Let's come back and do this. Let's prepare for Louis. He's on location. He'll tell us where. We're all going to be envious and jealous. And we'll talk a little hockey with him before we turn it over to the Minnesota Wild fan radio network at the top of the 6 o'clock hour. Dateline, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Well, she sneaks around the world from India to Carolina. She's a sticky-fingered filcher from Berlin down to Belize. Take you for a ride on a slow boat to China. Tell me, where in the world is
Lou Nanne?
By the way, before we say hi to Louie in his exotic location, probably looking out at the ocean as he chats with us, Stephon Diggs. Did we mention that in the top five?
We didn't,
he
but we
is
should.
officially out, ACL, correct?
For the year.
Out for the season, the former Vikings receiver. It's a cruel game, the game of professional football. Not so cruel, I think, is hanging out where Luigi is hanging out now. He joins us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. He's brought to us by, as always, our good friends at Kemp's. I'm thinking it's either 12:30 in the afternoon, or is it 1:30 in the afternoon right now where you are?
12:30.
12:30.
Which is
Okay.
perfect, yeah.
Yeah, that's just perfect. How's what's the current temperature?
84. But,
Ooh.
it could melt the ice cream of Kemp's.
Yeah, it certainly could. How about the breeze? A little breezy or not?
Yeah, it is a little breezy. Nice breeze today. Really a nice breeze.
So it kind of cools you off because 84 in the sun can get a little bit warm, but then you got that breeze. Now, which ocean is it? Is it the Mediterranean or is it the Dead Sea?
Pacific.
It's the Pacific.
The Pacific. I could have said Atlantic like I did about 20 years ago, but it's the Pacific.
It's Pacific. You sent Gaardsy and me. I sensed that, I'd like to think that you were just trying to share the beautiful spot from which you were talking to us, but it felt a little bit like you were flexing.
I told him I didn't watch it.
No, I just thought you might enjoy the view since you've seen it so many times.
The view is very nice. Your current location?
Kona, the big island of
Nice.
Hawaii.
Yeah.
Kona's actually maybe my favorite island, even though I know we love Maui.
Yep,
You do
sure.
too. It's a little quieter than Maui,
Right.
but it's just
A lot of people do love it. Yep.
yeah, it's a spectacular place.
Yeah, it definitely is. So this is the combo platter. Is this all pleasure or is this a work? You usually are finagling it as work and pleasure.
Well, I'm working right now, and and I think that might be the extent of my work for the week.
For the week, yeah. I had a hunch that might be. It looked like you got a nice view from the balcony.
Yeah, it's
your
gorgeous.
spot looked really, really, really. I told Gaardsy this the other day. I'm almost embarrassed to say it. 2 or 3 days a week, Luigi, I get online and there's a Hawaiian webcams website. And it's live camera shots from various islands, various beaches, just looking out at the water. And I just watch it for like 10 or 15 minutes at a time. Is that weird?
No, it's not. I think that's something that's really relaxing.
It is. Very calming.
It just has you recall many, many good memories. And,
Yes.
and
That's it.
fortunately more that you might make in the future.
I hope so.
It's amazing that I don't care when you come here. It just, the planes are full, the hotels are full. People just continually come. Doesn't matter what month you come. It just seems like a lot of people here.
Well, what's interesting is, I keep reading news stories out of Maui that they want more people again. They're down a little bit post the Lahaina fires, and they're still encouraging people to come, especially to that side of the island, the Kaanapali side, that they, for a long time, as you know, out of respect for the locals, it was stay away, right? But even then, there were a lot of locals who said, we got to be careful with that message because we do, to a certain extent, count on, that's a great part. That's a pretty significant part of our economy. So I think there is an effort actually to encourage. And this time of year, I am surprised. I would figure this late it would be lighter where any of the islands, including the one you're on.
Well, it isn't. When we checked in last night, I asked them if me and my family, are we going to be in the same floor? And they said, no, we're full. You're scattered all over. So we're not really scattered that bad. We have three couples on one floor and 2 on the other. But I was surprised when she says we're full, and we just have to scatter them all over. Yet, the best part about it, as you can recall, when you're here, and even though the hotels are full, they don't look full because everybody's out doing something. They're all gone somewhere. Mm-hmm. They all got different interests that they want satisfy, and they do it at different times. But try and get in the restaurant. That's what I spend most of my mornings, was making reservations for the week. And I'm telling you, there are a couple places you couldn't even get in already. And when you did get in, fortunately, we like to eat early. It's early times because
sure
the restaurants are very busy here.
Yeah, that's. I hope you have a good time there. I hope the weather stays good for you as well. The Wild wrap up. In fact, we're out at 6 tonight because the Wild wrap up their marathon road trip in Pittsburgh, taking on the Penguins. Before we get to your thoughts on the road trip to this point, Flower, we've talked about Fleury from time to time, obviously, but I think now we're at a point where the assumption is this is going to be the last year, that this is sort of the celebration tour, the retirement tour to an extent. So if you're trying to tell, you've seen a lot of goalies, over the decades, right? If you're trying to tell the Marc-Andre Fleury story, what stands out to you? What do you think? What are the key talking points that need to be discussed?
Well, first of all, consistency over a long period of time. I think this is 21st year in the league, and he's second most in victories, and I think second or third most in games. So he's been consistent. He plays all the time, and he plays well all the time, and he's one shutout away from Tony Esposito to be 10th overall, and I think 3 away from Luongo to be to go up to 9th or maybe even 8th. So he's done the job he stays healthy. And secondly, I guess the kind of teammate he is. He's beloved by every place he's been in, not only by the fans, but most importantly by his teammates. They just really, really adore this guy. And so when you got a guy that plays well, plays all the time, and is one of your favorite people to ever play with, that's a unique trait or traits, and he's been able to do it for a long time, and that's why he'll be first ballot Hall of Famer 3 years after he's finished.
Bradshaw and Brian, KFAN text line is open for the rest of this half hour. If you have a question or an observation for Luigi, 64686. Maybe you're on your. There may be some people in our audience on their way to Kona. Maybe you got something up your sleeve, and you're looking for some tips to head to the Big Island. Well, with Louis, you could pick pretty much any island. He'd probably be able to give you pretty good tips. 64686, Bradshaw and Bryant, KFAN text line. Road trip wraps up tonight. It has been nowhere near the disaster that was feared, right? Let's be honest. That was the concern. The team did not exactly, jump into the regular season a year ago, got themselves buried to a degree. Injuries added on to that misery. They have had some injuries this year already, but they have certainly more than held their own on this road trip. Louis, what stands out to you?
Well, I guess the fact that, as you said, playing on the road like they did and coming out with the kind of record they had, and first and foremost was to play at Gustafsson until he had his last game, against Philadelphia that wasn't so good. But outside of that, he was the backbone of the wins that they had there, and Fleury had one also in Tampa. And I'd have to say the consistency of the top 2 lines, they were always scoring. Somebody was always scoring there. And then I was really happy to see Foligno get a couple, because that's what you were really looking for, to find a third line that could chip in occasionally and give you a little more balance in the scoring. And they've played well, penalty killing, power play. So I like what I see, and they've done it, as you said, through some injuries. You had Spurgeon out all the time, and Eric Sinek missed a couple games, and Hartman's still out, probably going to be the 4th game tonight. And those are 3 key players, and to do it without them against good teams on the road makes you feel that they really believe in themselves and that they're playing a consistent hockey that you want to see from them that can bring them victories through the year.
Let me ask you a philosophical injury question. We have talked about this. In fact, Glenn Mason's going to be back in studio tomorrow. He's been on, as you know, this whirlwind trip, like by car with the Pooch, with Topo, seeing the country. He's finally on his way back and is going to join us in studio tomorrow. But he has said that he wonders sometimes, he feels like in an age in which in most sports, the attention to detail when it comes to health and off-season health and really even the science improving in, knowing how to treat various ailments better, that he almost feels like there's more injuries now than there have ever been. How do you view it in hockey? Is it the same? Is it worse? Do you feel his theory is always that are we overtraining some of our athletes, and that in some ways it ends up actually not having the the benefit that one might logically assume?
Well, I think that when you look at it now, we're starting to see knee injuries at a higher clip than we did over, say, the past 15, 20 years. But before that, there used to be a lot more as well. I do think that we're not seeing the number of shoulder separations we used to see because of the equipment that they have now. But we are seeing more broken bones in the feet now. Guys are shooting harder, there's no doubt about that. Right. But you also have to remember, they don't wear the same kind of equipment around their ankles that the guys used to wear. They want light skates, which they have, and those skates, they don't put any stuff, like we used to put, little protectors over top of our ankles on top of it. And they don't want to do that. And not doing that, I haven't seen this many broken feet or ankles as I'm seeing in this day and age. And that's the combination of both the protection and the shot speed that the guys have. And obviously, you're always going to get, injuries to the face. But because of the protection, first the helmet gave them, now the visors, it's cut down the most. I was surprised when Eriksson got the broken nose because he got the shield in front. But, the shield goes up occasionally, but you don't see as many facial injuries, as many cuts in the face as we used to see, as many guys losing teeth as we used to see. So it's a combination of both, but I don't think it's overtraining because the guys are in fabulous shape. It's just they're bigger, stronger, faster, and shoot harder.
Can you add, speaking of the broken nose, Eriksson broken nose, Brian from Manterville wants to know what you think of the guy from Philly going after said broken nose.
I don't know if guys really go after that. I really don't buy in that too much. The game goes at such a high pace, such a fast speed. It's really hard to say I'm going to hurt this guy here or there. You're just taking a man out, and many times you may be hitting them higher than you should be. You're going to get elbows up or sticks up, but I don't see the intentional aspect of it. I really don't. I know that it happens, and I know you try and hit them hard, and you want a body check, and I can honestly say you'd like to hurt them a bit, I mean, you take pleasure in being able to hit a guy hard, but it's not that it's intentional. It's just the joy of that physical contact that you'd like to make a statement the way you hit somebody.
Please ask Louis where I should stay in Hawaii with my wife since we've never been there. We are going there to celebrate my 60th birthday. That's Bob from St. Paul. Now, he doesn't say, I tell Bob, pick an island if you've already, I assume you mean you've already picked the island you're going to, because Louis knows them all, but it would probably help, right, to know which one he was talking about.
Yeah, well, if he's going to Honolulu, stay at the Hakalani there. If you're going to Maui, probably the best is maybe Four Seasons or Grand Wailea or the Ritz-Carlton on the northern part.
Mm-hmm.
If you're coming here to Kona, I really like this Western Hapuna, but the Four Seasons here is good, and so is Mauna Kea. And if you're going to Maui, I said Maui, and if you're going to Kauai, I'd go to St. Regis at the top.
Yeah.
And that's about as good as it gets. But the Sheraton down lower, it's got a nice golf course with it, and you could stay there too.
Yeah, those are all, I think, pretty good choices. And do you have timeshares in all those locations?
No, but you can use them in the different locations.
It is. That's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
Somebody also writes that the Ironman triathlon was in Kona last weekend, so that maybe.
Yeah, it was.
Is that right?
They have it here. They have it here every year. Yeah.
I didn't realize that the Ironman triathlon. That sounds like a tough one. That sounds like one maybe a little bit too challenging for me.
That. Yeah, it's amazing. How far they swim, how far they ride a bike, and how far they have to run. I have to tell you, that is something. Those guys are and women, they're in unbelievable shape. I couldn't do one of them in my prime, and they do three of them.
Dana in Fargo, speaking of goaltenders, does Louis have an old Gump Worsley story? He was my favorite North Star goalie growing up.
Well, he's such a guy with a strong retort, and there's a couple. I could tell 1,000 of them, but one of the ones that got a lot of publicity was the fact that if you looked at Gump, if you looked at his body, you didn't think he was an athlete, and he had a good-sized belly in front of him. And a lot of times he'd say, "That's my chest protector." But one night, he let a couple of bad shots in, and Phil Watson, coach of the Rangers, came in, and usually you don't give the goaltender any hell at all. But Phil Watson said, "The trouble with you, Gump, you drink too much beer." And Gump said, "I never had a beer in my life. I drink Canadian Club and water." He's always there with a retort. He never stops, and he was an amazing athlete because, as I said, condition-wise, you wouldn't think he could play a period.
Yes.
And he did give us the best. I never saw a better goaltending performance than he performed in Philadelphia. We beat him 1-0 to get into the playoffs, and that was the last game of the season. We had to beat him at home, and I think he made 42, 44 stops and shut him out. Now, he had another one in Boston where we tied Boston 4-4, but he had 72 shots. And after the game, I think it was Tommy Reed or somebody else, "Way to go, Gump. If you stopped one more, we would have won the game."
That's cold.
That was cold.
That is very
cold. But he could play net, that's for sure.
Were goalies more likely than other position players to smoke back in the day?
Well, he did a lot, but I don't think they're any more likely.
Okay.
I mean, if you walked in a locker room of Montreal Canadiens before a game, Guy Lafleur was completely dressed 2.5 hours before the game and smoking cigarettes, and Serge Savard be there almost completely dressed. He wouldn't have his shoulder pads on. I walked in, I was doing the 6th game of the Stanley Cup Finals. That's the night that Boston had too many men on the ice, and it was it might have been the night they had too many men on the ice. That was either that game or the next game, but Serge was in there smoking a cigar, 2.5 hours before the game, all dressed. And on our team, Bill Goldsworthy, he was a chain smoker, and I mean, he and Gump used to hide in the back toilet all the time, smoking all the time, because we wouldn't let him smoke in a room anymore. But Danny Grant was right there with him. He was another chain smoker. There were a lot of smokers in the league at that time.
Who was? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I don't think goaltenders were more than anybody else.
Who was the best? In every sport, I feel like there's athletes who almost as ritual threw up before the game. They almost made it a point on doing that. Did you? Was there like a favorite vomiter that you played with the North Stars?
No, one that I played against.
Oh,
Glenn Hall. He had,
the goalie.
Over 500 games.
Yeah.
He threw up before every game.
Every game.
Every game he threw up. And you know who else? Surprisingly enough, Reggie Fleming, one of the tougher guys in the league.
Tough guy.
Chicago Blackhawks.
Remember?
He threw up when he knew he was going to fight. If there was a guy that he really knew he was going to fight that night, he threw up before the game.
It cracks me up. Well, it's
better throwing up in a toilet than on a guy.
Well, that's true. That's true. I just, for me, I always associate throwing up with it washes me out. I'm weak. But then you got guys who was almost like it's the opposite. It almost seemed to liberate them. They got the tension out, and it didn't stop them physically from doing whatever they were capable of doing at all.
But you know what I used to think about with Gordie Howe? Because I don't care who you are, whether you're playing hockey, giving a speech, going to even watch a game that like the World Series, the Dodgers tonight, you want them to win. You're going to have nervousness before that game. You're going to feel nervous.
Sure.
But you don't know that when you're playing that other guys are nervous. And Gordie Howe, I think, made it okay for everybody to be nervous. When they asked Gordie Howe if he was nervous before a game, he said, "I'm always nervous before a game. If I wasn't nervous, I wouldn't be very sharp. I wouldn't be up for the game. When I'm nervous, I know I'm getting ready for the game. That's my adrenaline getting going." And when you think about that, when you say, "Oh, the greatest player in the world,"
yes, right,
because it's not conflicting with the fact that you'll say, if you're worried about making a mistake, you're going to make a mistake. And you have to remember that everybody makes mistakes out there. As we say all the time, baseball hitters batting champs out 2/3 of the time. And I tell everybody the biggest room for improvement is, is the biggest room in the world, and I mean the room for improvement is the biggest room in the world. So you have to know that, but you have to be able to put that aside. I love the story about Lou Holtz. You know, when he went to Notre Dame, he had this one kicker. And first game of the year, the kicker misses two field goals, and Holtz goes back to talk to him. The kicker sees him coming. He says, "Sorry, coach, but when I see you, I get nervous when I'm kicking." And Holtz says, "Well, you're gonna have to do something about it because I plan on being at every game." It's just it's something that athletes have to deal with.
That's true. That's part of the deal. That's what the great ones do. And like you said, the great ones also don't deny they're nervous. They don't. They almost embrace it and say that's just sort of part of the process. Here's my hope. I hope you have a wonderful dinner tonight. Wonderful time. The rest of the time you are on the big island of Hawaii, and we'll chat with you the next week.
Great. Nice to talk to you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Luigi.
Take care.
Lou Nanne, the big island of Hawaii, joining us on, what do you say, about 84 degrees, but kind of breezy. You know, maybe 17, 18 mile per hour gusts, which isn't bad at all. Sounds perfect, actually. Those trade winds, man, they're special. What do we have left? Well, not much, because we're out early for hockey. Wild in action tonight, wrapping up the road trip against Louis' aforementioned Pittsburgh Penguins. Earlier in the show, if you missed it, I would heartily recommend you podcast another very solid hour with Kevin Seifert, covering everything you want covered on your Vikings, who they might be looking at before the trade deadline, the Colts quarterback decision, how that weighs on what the Vikings' defensive approach might be. We talked a lot about the left tackle situation, pretty much everything. And we took one last look back at, we both agree, the easiest Hail Mary completion in the history of Hail Marys. Tomorrow is a Wednesday show. That means Kessler. That means Glenn Mason, not only back on the show, but back in studio, he tells us. Do you think he's driving right now? When was he going to get back to town? Do we know?
Not sure. He just said he'd be here Wednesday.
Yeah, that's all that matters. Will he be driving the car he showed us in that video?
I hope not.
I think that's staying in Naples, Florida.
It's staying in Naples. That was the land of opportunity.
Wasn't it a Mercedes convertible?
Rolls-Royce.
Rolls-Royce convertible, yeah. Well, who am I? No, Mercedes. Come on, man. Rolls-Royce. And anybody else tomorrow?
Mike Conley.
Right tomorrow.
At the top of the show.
So we'll get a review on Wolves-Mavericks, a game you can hear on the Timberwolves channel tonight on the Fan. So we got you all covered tonight, whether you're into pro basketball or professional hockey as well. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we look forward to chatting with you again tomorrow, beginning at 3.
If you ever go to Houston, got to walk right, got to keep your hands deep in your pocket and your gun belt tight. Thank you for the memories. Thank you for the great time. We love you, Dan.